Kiki mai tu ki te hui o te konihera o Tamaki Makaurau. Good morning everybody to today's governing body. Sandra announced the apologies. We have an absence from Councillor Bartley and a full house, I believe.
And we've got lateness from Councillor Filipina and Councillor Williamson, and early departure from Councillor Hills, Dalton and Foley.
Sales, is he coming? All right. So, move and second to those apologies, please. Hills and Walker in favour. Aye. Contrary. Carried. Declarations of interest. Any special ones? None. No. Confirmation of minutes. Anybody read the minutes? Mover and a seconder, please. Walker and Simpson in favour. Aye. Contrary. Carried. Right, once again we've got a very full agenda and I tend to run a structured meeting for all items. After the item has been presented, I will take questions only for each item. I expect you to be concise when you ask your question and not lead with yet another speech. Once questions have been completed, I'll ask staff to move away from the table, then we'll move into debate. As per standing orders, you'll have 5 minutes to speak. I'll ask Sandra to ring a bell at 4 minutes to know when you start wrapping up, and if we follow this, the meeting should run reasonably smooth manner. And if it doesn't, I hope you brought a sleeping bag because we'll be here all day. Firstly, we have 5 requests for public input and 3 of them been declined. David Schwartz, figure of Kiwi Property, was declined under Standing Order 774B. Is there a consultation process? Adrian Donnelly Fletcher Living, because his was out of time. And Adam Curry on the budget has declared he has had a public consultation attached to it. But we have accepted requests from the Auckland War Memorial, Professor Richard Bedford, Dr. David Gamester, James Liddell, for consideration of funding contributions to regional cultural and safety amenities. Please come forward. Deputy Mayor, do you want to say something now? Oh, then you're going to acknowledge. Yeah. Okay. Righto. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Your Worship, for the opportunity to speak very briefly. We will stick to your 5 minutes. About the museum's levy request. My name is Richard Bedford and I'm the chair of the Trust Board. With me I have David Gamester, the Chief Executive, and we have apologies from James Liddell, who went down with COVID this morning. I'd like to start by thanking the elected representatives and officials for the very positive and collaborative way we've had discussions about the levy and the museum's plans for 2023-24 over the past 6 months. I also want to acknowledge the officials' recommendation and advice that a modest increase to the museum's levy is appropriate for next year. As all of you are aware, the museum has had no increase since 2019-20. But we also want to acknowledge, obviously, the Council's financial position. We're acutely aware of this, and I want to assure you that this has featured very heavily in the Trust Board's discussions about our levy request. The museum, as always, is very grateful for Council and ratepayer support. There wouldn't be a museum without ratepayer and Council support. We've requested a levy of $33.84 million, which is a 4.8% increase on the current levy. We revised this down from an originally signalled 8.8% increase, which had been supported by respondents in public consultation. And we brought that down, we halved that increase in response to the Council's budget situation. Now, we fully recognise that this is not an easy pathway, either for the Council or the museum. We feel that an uplift in the levy is a really key way for ensuring that we can collaborate and find a way through the museum's financial challenges that have been wrought by COVID and stalled public funding. And David will now speak very briefly to that.
Kia ora, Richard. Kia ora koutou katoa. Good morning, everyone. I've got 3 very brief slides which tell our financial story and the pathway ahead. With several scenarios mapped out. If we can look at the first slide, I'd be grateful. I'm responsible for that. Good. Sorry. Thank you. So we've mapped out several scenarios. We think this will be useful for your deliberations of our levy request later today. So looking at the first slide, these are our deficit scenarios. Pre-COVID, the museum had built up a large asset renewal reserve and been spending this on major vital capital works that were really needed to bring parts of the building up to modern standards. Then COVID severely limited our ability to generate revenue. And this was coupled with no increases to our levy funding for 3 consecutive years. During COVID, we significantly restructured our organisation, reduced staff numbers and services. We began running larger deficits just to deliver our core services, as our public funding was not sufficient to make up this shortfall. This has now the potential to become an ongoing and structural deficit for the museum if we don't see a modest adjustment to the levy this year. We have plotted a course out of this, and this relies on some front-ending of our levy funding, increasing our self-generated revenue, careful cost control over the medium term. If we look at the debt graph now, because our ability to generate income has been limited and we have not had increased public funding support, we've been essentially funding our operational deficit using depreciation reserves set aside for our forward capital programme. We're now very much at the end of our runway. We're not able to take on debt sustainably. We have a bow wave of larger asset renewals coming up. These include galleries which are coming up to 25, 30 years old, and those include, of course, the Māori Court, which is the largest gallery in the museum. Services around the galleries are becoming older and need replacing. And we have other critical building renewals in our asset plan, including lifts and, of course, heritage roofing. We'll start taking on debt in the coming years to manage this situation over the medium term. The Museum Board is clear that significant debt is not an appropriate position for a large intergenerational organisation because, unlike council, we don't have assets that we can use to provide adequate security. The board has set a debt ceiling with the intention to bring debt to zero as quickly as possible. Our requested levy increase means bringing debt down quicker than other scenarios. In our view, this is the most responsible funding solution. As you see, with no levy increase, our debt ceiling is quickly breached. Without interventions to significantly increase our asset renewal programme, and even with a rescoped asset plan, with no or even with 3% increases, we eventually breach our debt policy. And if we don't do this, we're looking at long-term damage to the organisation. So finally, just quickly on the revenue scenario, we are just to assure councillors that we're doing everything that we can to maximise our own revenue generation. We're not just relying on the levy. Our solution is a formula, a combined formula of sustainable public funding and increasing revenue generation and cost-saving initiatives. As I have been at pains to impress on councillors recently, we're doing everything we can to keep a very tight lid on costs. And this includes also looking at procurement opportunities with council where appropriate and how we might save money by working with our sector colleagues. We've got several conversations underway. We've requested a 4.8% levy rate increase after 3 years of no increase in our funding. We think it's a very reasonable request, and as you can see from the charts we've shown today, that scenario perhaps is the best route out of our deficit and away from debt. It also means we're also highly reliant on our self-generated revenue. We welcome the officials' recommendation for 3%. Obviously, it's lower than what we've requested, but we can manage that for the next financial year. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Sorry for going over time slightly. Apologies.
Thank you, sir. Deputy Mayor wishes to say something.
So Richard and David, lovely to see you. And David, I'll say, if I may, some words about you in a minute in moving the thanks. Your Worship, if I can do that. But I just got a couple of questions first, if I may. What role do you see for Auckland Council as about 75% funder of the museum and appointer of, say, 50% of your board in having a formal say in the strategic direction of your board?
Would you like to answer that? Or shall I?
Well, I think that's a very fair question, and David can speak in a minute to that too. And I'm aware that there is an interest in the council in this, and of course, as we develop our next strategic plan, our consultation requires us to engage very fully with the council. It's not something that we just develop in isolation. As you're aware, the majority of board members are council appointees, so we do have quite a significant input, potentially, through those representatives on our particular board.
Thank you. My second question, because of course the legislation around you and us is very interesting, I think. And you've indicated a desire for more central government funding in the past. So to convince central government, I think we will need to demonstrate more than just a claim of we are of national significance. So what activities do you feel that should be funded by central government?
Thank you, Councillor. We've done an analysis of not only our national significance, but also, more importantly, our national benefit at the services that we provide to the nation. These are extensive. These include major educational services. Those include major services to iwi and to communities around New Zealand in respect of the repatriation of taonga and other assets. And in the area of sustainability as well, and leading the sector on various initiatives for museums, galleries and other cultural assets in sustainability. There's a whole series of other initiatives as well, but these are services that we have developed given the scale and the significance of the assets that we hold. Another point really that everybody should be aware of is that so many of our collections originate from around the nation and not just from the locality. We're not a local history museum, we're effectively a national museum for Aucklanders in Auckland, in effect. And the future, and I've always argued this, and I've said it at this table several times, the future must be about a formula, a shared formula between central and local government for the funding model going forward. However, we are facing an immediate and medium-term financial crisis, and we need to find a solution short-term, longer-term. I think we need new conversations, and we've initiated those with our colleagues in government. We've had several conversations with the Ministry for Culture and Heritage. We're talking to members of Parliament and others about the future, and that's a different conversation. And to be successful in that endeavour, we're going to need everybody to work together, including Council, to support the museum in that conversation and that ambition.
Okay, I said 2 questions, so here comes the second one. Lotto, I know you wanted to have one. Can you have a chat to the guys quietly after? Otherwise I'll lose the day. So I'm going to hold to the 2 questions per day, per thing today. So Wayne Walker, please.
Sure. Got a question for you around the bow wave problem. And I guess it goes like this. Correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're stating is, irrespective of how successful you are in terms of getting people through the door, because essentially it's free, but obviously there's a huge social value attached to it, you're not in a position to pay for vital repairs to the building to protect the taonga. And I would suggest, and you may not be aware of this, but your financial frugality over the last few years has been significantly better than council. I don't know whether you're aware of that, and you're coming to us, correct me if I'm wrong, but in a position where you are incredibly hard pressed, and Auckland Council is really the lifesaver in terms of helping you.
Well, you've summed up a lot of very relevant points there, yes. And we feel very strongly as a board that Auckland's ratepayers for the past 100 years or more have contributed to the development of this museum on the hill. And last year we celebrated, in fact, the Mayor of Auckland of the day led a design competition for the museum, which is built there. So we're very conscious that we, as David has mentioned, we are dealing with an intergenerational asset, and we just have to keep that asset in really good shape. Coming to your point about people coming through the door, we don't feel, given that this is a publicly funded asset as it is, that we should be charging Aucklanders when they walk through the door to use their museum. They've invested in it already. But equally, we are aware that what brings them through the door can't just be a static set of boxes with taonga. The whole way that museums operate has changed, and we have to be with that, and this is where David Gamester, as director, has been vitally important over the last 5 years in helping us to move the museum into a very relevant and modern space.
Okay, thanks for that. Item 12 later in the day discusses this, and there'll be more opportunity for people to debate and question at that stage. All right, thank you very much for that. Next group to come to the front. Oh, Councillor Simpson.
Yeah, Your Worship, in moving this, I would just like to say a few words of acknowledgement about David Gamester, because many of you will be aware that he comes to the end of his tenure very shortly. Dr. Gamester, or David, started back in 2017, can you believe, that long ago, replacing the previous director, Roy Clare. You came from the Hunterian in Glasgow, and it represented a big change of career for you, and you've done that really, really well. And I know you and your family have embraced all that is Auckland and in New Zealand, with your wife, of course, also working in Auckland here at Highwick House. So like all organisations, the last few years have not been easy for the Auckland Museum. It is a museum that covers the widest possible range of subject matters and attempts to provide a survey of the natural and scientific world and of human history in its broad span. Of course, it is also Auckland's War Memorial Museum and housed in a significant historic building. This means it has significant assets which have been built up over time by Aucklanders and is maintained by Aucklanders. It's in this context, David, that you have provided a steady hand and responded to the challenges given to us by the global pandemic. Part of this was working with your board to ensure the museum did not contribute additional stress to the challenges that we at Council faced financially over that time. And for that, we are most very, very grateful. In the context of a vastly reduced revenue base, to continue to be a well-loved part of Auckland that has rebounded well is an absolute achievement for you. So thank you. In a personal capacity, I've worked with you, David, of course, as Chair of the Domain Committee. Obviously, the museum is a major feature of the Domain, and we've had many significant dealings on access projects in and through the Domain with regards to the museum. So on behalf of us all, I would like to thank you for your contribution to Auckland through the Auckland War Memorial Museum and wish you all the best in your new challenge across the ditch. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together, please.
Okay, there's a motion from Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Foley, to receive the public input from these gentlemen on behalf of the Auckland Memorial regarding item 12 and consideration of the funding. I'd like to thank them for their attendance and acknowledge the service of Dr. David Gamester to Auckland War Memorial and wish him well for his role. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Contrary? Well done. Thank you very much for that. Kiwi Property, David Schwartzfigger, and the opportunity to speak to item 9, which is investment in Drury. Please come to the front. Yeah, you're welcome.
Good morning, Council. Kia ora. Good morning, Council. Kia ora. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the Mayor and councillors. Investment in Drury. So obviously Kiwi is one of the many developers in Drury. We're conscious that we need to try and get this right. This is a very important project for the Greater Auckland. It represents something in the order of 7,000 jobs and 20,000 homes. Really important in this time. Financially, for many families, it's very difficult, and housing is obviously a key topic around the city, together with employment. Quickly, the issues I want to cover. Look, we need to get this right. There's been a lack of transparency through the process, which we're concerned about, and some of the filters on some of the projects are difficult. And as you'll see, there's a number of errors through the information that you received. But look, we think that there is a simple solution to it, and we'll take you through that. Currently, central government's spending $2.8 billion of investment in South Auckland. That's underway and it's happening. You'll see the motorway expanding as we go, and NZTA, together with central government, putting money into train stations through Drury, due to be finished 2025-26, and at that time it would be fantastic to see jobs and homes in the area. We need to ensure that that investment operates efficiently when it opens. I think the last thing that any of us want to see is that we've got a train station and trains that are working inefficiently without people around them, and essentially are stranded assets. Kiwi Property Income, together with other developers, are funding significant amount of upgrades through the Drury area. That in parallel with central government and the investments from council, we need everybody to work together. The infrastructure that we're putting in equally matches the numbers in front of you, which is obviously very similar to the investment, and it all needs to work seamlessly together. And I guess my point to that is that if we're not putting in the local roads, we're not upgrading the sewerage, I'm not building motorway ramps, that's left to then to council to do. We all need to seamlessly and in lockstep work together. And I guess to that point, when we then turn ourselves to having a 30-year budget, the cost of the inflation to it, the cost of the creep on top of it, the cost of the interest on top of it, blows the numbers out of the water. And I guess it becomes a disincentive when we're sitting there and we escalate the cost of, and there's an example that has come to the council is where we had a project which had a land value of some 100 million. By the time it was escalated, it popped out to $1 billion. So we need to ensure that there is long-term good quality planning over a 30-year period, but then when we start putting compound escalation,
Morning.
not my supporters, but when we start putting compound interest on top of it, it becomes problematic. And I guess, look, I've pulled out some examples for you with respect to lack of transparency. You'll have some papers in front of you on the list of items that you're currently considering. In the last round that's come out in the last 2 months, there's obviously been $500 million worth of additional costs lumped on top of it. The actual expenditure that council's now looking at making from what we saw as consultation has actually popped out 37 years. And look, we've identified to you where there's problems in the calculations. And as I said, projects that have changed in value and literally do not make any sense to us. In the most recent round of stuff, we've given you a couple of examples in there. There's a Jesmond Road project that came out not more than 3 months ago. It's now popped from 19 million to 120 million. We see a cycleway that's popped in value from 40 million to 110 million. So we're okay with long-term planning, but we just think it's really important that we try and get these numbers right before a decision is made on them. Conversely, we've given you another couple of examples here. There's no filter on the projects. So currently in the list that you have in front of you today, you're looking at putting a bridge through the national power grid. It is very difficult. And not being disrespectful, it's 220 kV line. Putting a bridge within contact distance of it, it's just not going to work. So we need to have a filter on this stuff to get it right in the list before it's put through. Lastly, and moving through quickly, you obviously have some papers in front of you. Again, we've tried to reconcile the papers. You'll appreciate that the papers don't really add up. So, you know, personally, I find it difficult that you've been asked to make a decision on it. When I table through the list, it doesn't compute through. When I take the summary table, it doesn't compute through. So, look, it's difficult, and I appreciate it's difficult for the councillors, but this stuff is really important. It needs to happen in lockstep. It needs to be accurate. We need everybody to work together in a cooperative process, not lists just to be sent out that they're an interesting wish list. So I guess my ask is that we pause the process on Drury investment today. I've made the suggestion that we just get a mediator, and you know, I don't mind whether it's a judge, I don't mind whether it's Bill Cashmore, I don't mind if it's somebody, but to sit down, work through the list, get the numbers right so that the councillors have an accurate list to make a decision on, and ensure that it's just fair and equitable and correct as a good basis to start with. And I know that there's some pressure on making a decision, getting it done. I don't actually think that you have time constraints. A lot of the first wave of development on Drury, look, it's zoned, it is consented, the DCs are locked in. You know, on Drury West, it's an 800 lot subdivision, you've accepted it, DCs are $9,000 a lot. That stuff's already locked in, so let's get it right for future stages moving forward. And look, happy to take any questions.
Well, thanks for that. I think we all agree that we should have the numbers right. And I'm pleased to hear you say that you're okay with long-term planning, but just get the numbers right, so that's good. I also note you said that the trains are coming, so we need the houses. It's kind of the other way around. I thought the trains became because you have the houses, but call me old-fashioned. No, anybody particularly desperate to ask this gentleman 2 questions? We are discussing this later in the day, and he has put forward something which is worth considering. And I think we'll accept that. And thank you very much for your contribution. Councillor Darby can't resist himself. So
Sorry, a bit late on that. Thanks, Chair. Just in terms of you're supportive of long-term planning for those future communities, but you're not supportive of a 30-year outlook for DCs. Can you just reconcile that? Or are you supportive of a 30-year outlook, but you just want accuracy on the detail?
So, good question. Look, we're supportive of long-term planning. We're supportive of making sure that we've got a long-term future in place. What we're not supportive of is that when you take it outside of the 10-year round, the compounding interest, the uncertainty in the inflation becomes enormous. And as an example, we're inflating in your model at 7 or 8% through the model. There's already uncertainty built in. So to give you a practical example, in the numbers that we saw in the consultation pack. Council wanted to buy $100 million worth of flood land. It got inflated to $1 billion. So that, to me, seems wrong, you know. So, look, do it in increments of 10 years. That's what the LGA provides for. Certainly have a 30-year vision, have a 50-year vision, and check back in and get it right.
Okay, just one quick one, Mayor. We'll take that on board. I hear you're supportive of long-term planning for the communities. It's somewhat about the detail. We'll get there. Just in terms of, this has been a long road to get to this point, and you're suggesting a pause now. How many engagements has your company, or I think, David, you in your letter to us, you were representing 4 parties, weren't you?
Yeah, so...
Or was that just from Kiwi?
No,
So how many engagements have you had?
We've probably had 5 engagements. I am still chasing the same data I've requested 3 years ago. There is still an active Lagoima/official information request on simple stuff. So transparently release the information, get down to the detail. You should be able to get through it very quickly, but staff need to be transparent. They need to, you know, it's not rocket science. Yeah.
Good question, thank you. Thank you for your presentation.
No, super. Thank you for your time.